Hey everyone, this is Eric Vasquez here. Welcome back. We're about to get started on our first design tutorial, so I hope you're all with me. Once you fired up Photoshop, we're going to go ahead and create a new document. And for the purposes of this tutorial, I usually like to create a higher res version of my image. This way, it's always easier to go back later on and size it down as opposed to doing the opposite of creating a small image and then trying to blow it up later, where you'll get lots of distortion and pixelation and it just won't look good. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and just make this standard letter size document, 8.5 by 11 inches, 300 dpi for the resolution. And for the purposes of this tutorial, we can leave it as RGB. Now, you don't have to name your document here. You can if you want to, but we're just going to do that once we save our file. So you'll see here, now we have a nice new window. I'm just sizing it to fit the screen. And now if you're using an earlier version of Photoshop, it doesn't really matter. It looks the same, and a lot of the tools are very similar. So you don't have to worry. I really don't think that there's too many new features if you were working on CS5 and now coming to CS6. I really don't think that's too big of a deal. So starting off, let's go ahead. We're going to make a new layer. And what we're going to do is, you'll notice over here you have your two default colors, which you can get any time by pressing D on your keyboard. Now to toggle between these two colors, you can press the X key, and you'll notice them switching back and forth over here. So a nice little shortcut that we can use when you want to fill a new layer with whatever your foreground color is by pressing the Alt Option plus Delete key. So you'll see now what I've just done is filled this whole new layer with black. Now, if I switch my colors to white and press Alt Option plus the Delete key again, I will have filled it with white. So that's just a handy little shortcut I tend to use quite a bit. Also good practice. I just like to name my layers to keep track of things. It's always good practice. So right now we're just starting off with this. I'm going to go ahead and create another new layer on top of that. Just by clicking down here on the Create New Layer button or icon. You can also do this by pressing Command plus Alt Option plus Shift and N, and that will also give you a new layer. So whichever one of these you're more comfortable with. I do like to use a lot of shortcuts, and I will make sure to try and explain them as best as I can. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and press P once again to switch over to your pen tool. And for some of you guys, you may be familiar with this tool already. I'm sure some of you who may be more, intermediate or advanced are pretty familiar with this. But for those of you who are not, this is a great tool, very powerful tool, and it's something that when I first started playing around with Photoshop, I felt kind of intimidated by. Now, it's a little bit different than the pen tool in Illustrator, but you'll notice that it gives you a couple of options here. You have path, shape, and you can do some pretty cool stuff with this. It's also really good because you get some nice smooth edges as opposed to just brushing with your brush tool, which will tend to be a little more choppy. So for now, I think we're just going to leave this as is. I'm still exploring some of these options as well, but you can see here you're just going to click and make a point, and then click and hold your mouse down, or if you're working on a laptop, just hold that button down and just move it around and kind of get a feel for what it does and how it moves. It's very fluid, and you'll notice these handles here are expanding and coming closer together, and it allows you to make some pretty interesting shapes. So we're just going to experiment with this for a moment here, just so you can get a feel for how the pen tool works and what you can do with it. Now, one pretty cool trick that I learned is if you hold down the Alt and Option key, you get this arrow cursor, like a carrot almost, and what you can do then is kind of drag these handles around. So you can see here I'm just holding down the Alt Option key and moving this handlebar around, and what that does is it will kind of dictate the direction of your next mouse click. So say I move this all the way over here and then I click, you'll see it kind of goes in this direction, but it's going to be a hard angle over here, which is not what we want. Sometimes this is the desired effect, but right now we want to do something like this to just kind of get a more smooth and natural path going for ourselves. So you can kind of get a feel for that. It's a nice little tip here, is that when you're doing this, you want to get some nice smooth edges. This obviously not a very desirable point right here, but what you can do then is if you go back to your pen tool and you hold down the mouse over this, you can actually add another point. You can remove this point altogether if you want, simply by clicking here and dragging out. Now, while this is a useful, there's a couple of useful tools in here, but some of these you may wish to experiment with a little bit more. There you go. So that just removed that point right there just by clicking on it, and now I have a fairly smooth shape that I've created here. So again, I'm just going to go in and kind of refine this shape a little bit. It's kind of like a hot dog shape or a big U shape. But just play around with that and get a feel for the pen tool. So once you have a shape that you're happy with, something that you can do is hold down the Control key and click anywhere along this path. And you'll notice that the cursor changes from the pen to this arrow with the little icon next to it. So when you go ahead and click on your path, you'll see it'll give you a couple of options. Now the option that I'm most concerned with at this point is Make Selection. What this is going to do is allow us to turn our shape into a live area where you'll see the marching ants going around, indicating that you have made a selection from your path. So once you've done this, you can go ahead and select a color, pick a red or a magenta, and again just hit the Alt Option plus Delete key to fill that shape. Now I'm just going to take a step back for a moment here, back to my path. On this, if I go ahead and do this again and hit Make Selection, you'll notice this screen right here. So what this does is basically it allows you to feather your selection, which some of you may already know. It just kind of gives you a softer edge. Now, while I don't want to do that, I'm just going to show you guys what it looks like. So you'll see here it's kind of more of a blurred, fuzzy looking shape as opposed to the smooth, hard edge shape that we had before. But that's something that you can play around with as well. But for the purposes of this tutorial and this lesson, we're just going to go for more of a hard edge. Oops. Just take a step back right here. Make Selection, 0, and fill with your solid color. So now you can move this shape around freely on your canvas, however you like. Rotate it, warp it, transform it. It's basically a quick little run through of how we're going to be using the pen tool for this tutorial. So this isn't the best shape. It was just something I did kind of quick to show you guys, to get the idea of how we're going to be constructing our design today. So again, I'm just gonna name this layer something like Shape 1, and show you guys what will kind of be the next step here. What you can do, you'll notice this layer thumbnail over here in your layers palette. If you hold down the Command key and click on it, you'll notice that you once again have this the marching ants, or this active selection area. Now, while this area is selected and is active, you can then switch over to your pen tool, or sorry, your brush tool rather, and use the left and right bracket keys to gradually decrease or increase the size of your brush. This is a nice little shortcut too that I tend to use a lot while working. And there's a couple of other cool things that you can do with this as well. You'll notice by default up here in your brush settings that you've got what looks to be more of a soft edged brush. Now if you hold down the Shift key and you hit your bracket keys again, hit your right bracket key, you'll get a hard edge to your brush. Now if you hit the left key, you'll have more of a soft edge going on here. Okay, so that's just a nice little shortcut there. You can see what happens there. What's happening is I'm just painting inside of this selection with kind of a soft round brush, or having the hard edge brush. So this is the basic idea, is that we're going to make our shapes and then airbrush them with our brush tool using a low opacity brush to gradually build up form and make these shapes appear more three-dimensional. So pay attention to the opacity and the flow up here in your settings. One other shortcut that I want to show you guys really quick before we move on is how to control the opacity of your brush without actually going here every time and moving the slider around and things like that. And it's something that is also pretty handy, and we'll be using it just to work more quickly and efficiently. If you have your brush tool selected and you type any of the numbers on your keyboard, you will be able to control the opacity that way. So you can see up here it's just changing, 50%, 30%. I generally like to keep the opacity pretty low so you can gradually build on top of it. So let's keep the opacity for now at about 20%, create another new layer, and then just lightly begin to brush into this shape. And you can kind of see, what's starting to happen, although we have some hard edges in there, which isn't exactly what we want. So instead, I'm just going to modify the brush settings a little bit. But we'll get a little more into this as we progress. This is mostly to give you guys an overview of kind of how this technique works. Airbrushing is pretty cool. You can do as little or as much as you want. And then, you can start to experiment with some of these blending modes over here as well, which sometimes, will give you some more interesting results than others. Sometimes it's not very noticeable, but this is the basic idea. So we're going to dive more into that in our next lesson, but this was just a quick overview and introduction to some of the techniques that we're going to be using in this tutorial. So I hope you guys will continue to watch, and I look forward to seeing you in our next lesson.